Hi, everybody. Welcome to Busy Living Sober. Busy Living Sober. Busy Living Sober. If you're here for the first time, what? You're here. And if you're back, we love having our old friends back. So thanks for being here. And I am so excited as always. I love to have guests on and make new friends. That's what I feel like I'm doing here with Busy Living Sober. I'm like making new friends along my journey that so sweetly some reach out to me, some I reach out to them. And today, Morgan Adams reached out to me, and she's a holistic sleep coach. And I want to thank her for reaching out because I have to tell you, I don't know anybody I don't talk to these days. Now I'm gonna preface this with like I'm 55 and a lot of my friends are all around my age, right? Like I have one of my two closest friends is 80 and she has problems sleeping. So she doesn't sleep a lot. Then I have friends that are in their 40s. They're having problems sleeping. So this is a topic that everybody can relate to, isn't it? And thank you for
It,
coming on and
yes,
reaching
and
out.
it is. I'm resounding with you. So many people are having trouble sleeping. I'm very, very glad that you accepted my invitation to come on. I invited myself on. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Morgan. Well, it's so important again because so many people are out there and they're like, why am I not getting enough sleep? And I am included. And I will get desperate. And I read on on the about part of your website that you didn't get into too much nitty-gritty. So of course, that's what I want to get into because that's what I like to do with my dear friends. We like to have honest conversations. So I understand that you used to be in the pharmaceutical industry and you would use those sleep aids to help you. And I've used Benadryl many times because I know that if I take a Benadryl, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm not going to feel so groggy and horrible, but I will definitely get a good night's sleep. What is that about?
Well, um, what is the
What is, so to be exact, it's like, why do we all, for one, why aren't we sleeping? Let's go to the first
yes,
basic
yeah,
question. What is your opinion on why we aren't sleeping?
yeah. Okay, so there are many, many reasons why we're not sleeping. I think in my client population who have insomnia, I'm feeling like the most common reasons are stress and anxiety. People are getting overworked about things in their life. They're lacking skills in how to settle themselves and deal with that anxiety and stress. That's a very common reason. But there are a lot of other reasons why people are having trouble sleeping. And there's sort of a different camp of people that I think these are not really my clients, but in being in the sleep world and talking about sleep, there's also a segment of people that I have come across. And what it's called is revenge bedtime procrastination. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term before, but it's often with women, moms, not to stereotype, but it just seems to happen more often with this segment of people. And what this is, it's when somebody is busy all day long doing things for other people. They have no time for themselves. They take no time for themselves. And then the nighttime hits, kids are put to bed, their work is finished, and they kind of go crazy with like Netflix, maybe wine. Sometimes that's also in the mix, unfortunately. Um, and what they are doing is they're sort of intentionally rebelling against their bedtime because the time is theirs. They don't have to give that time to anyone. It is their own time. And they end up sort of sleep depriving themselves. And they know better, quote unquote, than to do that, but it's just incredibly tempting to do it anyway. So that's sort of on the other side of the spectrum of why people are having trouble sleeping, but it's all kind of everywhere in between. So many reasons.
And do you think that our mothers or our grandmothers, like I don't remember my mom ever going, for one, even my mom never, God rest her soul, never like reached for a pill that helped her sleep, right? And I don't even remember my grandmother who, had a big job, she ran a corporation and everything. I don't remember her. I know she did drink. My mom didn't do that, but my grandmother did. But, reaching for something that's going to help, I don't remember it back then. Do you? I mean, is it this
Well,
new?
no, but you're bringing up a really interesting thread here. Think back to, a generation or two ago. They didn't have screens that were tempting them. They didn't have as much blue light in their environment. So their circadian rhythm was more aligned to be able to sleep better, to be able to follow those rhythms. So screens can be a big problem, and we can kind of get into that. But I think it's an interesting observation you made, because those things did not exist back then. And even like the lighting right now, I just saw a post on Instagram by somebody who actually had a picture of street lighting and home lighting kind of before and after, like many, many years ago. And you can see quite clearly the tones and the lighting before us was warmer, or maybe when we were growing up, whatever, we are in our 50s. So, but the tones were warmer versus today. There's a lot more bright blue lighting tones in our home environment at night, and we're not really properly managing that light to our benefit. So we could all like kind of use some help with our home and dimming the lights, getting, turning off some of the overhead lights, getting blue blocking glasses. I mean, there's like tons of strategies to kind of mitigate that light.
But it's interesting because I mean, all those things that you brought up are so true, because our moms were not sitting there binging on something on Netflix, right? You maybe had
Right.
Dynasty once a week, or General Hospital, or Knots
Right.
Landing, or one of those, soap
Right.
operas that was on once a week. But it wasn't like parents were always, or especially mom. I don't remember my mom like sitting around watching TV that much. There wasn't news on 24/7. All these things that keep distracting us.
Yes. You make a great point. There's a lot more going on in our environment than there was then. And I mean, there's like more toxins in our environment. There's just like a whole lot more stuff that is distracting us from a good night of sleep now versus then. Absolutely.
It's crazy. So I want to get to so let's talk personal between the two of us. So you're married? Obviously, I can see, at least
Yes,
I assume you are. Do you have
I am.
children?
No children, two dogs and two cats. So it's a very busy house. Yeah.
But so you went through, you had this job in the pharmaceutical industry, which is so demanding. I have another good friend who works well, she works in the medical device, and it's so demanding, right? This is like you're working like a dog. And even one of my son's daughter, a friend of ours, has just got a job, and she's working for a big corporation, and her hours are insane, like working, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 7:30 at night, exhausted. And then you come home and you can't sleep. So is that what happened to you? Tell us about your journey.
Well, I can only tell you parts of it because I have to protect another person. But basically, what was going on when I was like in my mid 30s, I was in a new relationship that had a lot of stress to it. So I can't really divulge a lot more than that. But that stress actually manifested in my insomnia getting kicked off. So quite often with insomnia, what we find is, there are people who have predisposing factors, and I think I had a little bit of that anyway, sort of an anxiety, perfectionistic kind of personality trait. And then this incident with this man happened that was very stressful. And it kicked off this episode where I was not able to fall asleep. Like we're talking, I would lie in bed for like 2 hours waiting to sleep. And because of that, after like 2 months of just this frustration, I decided to go to my doctor. And that's when I was prescribed Ambien. So because I was part of the pharmaceutical industry at the time, I really did feel comfortable accepting a pill because pills were my world. I mean, there was nothing unusual about taking a pill. So I took the pill. It did what was advertised. It helped me get to sleep a little bit more quickly because it's sedating. However, the next day I had a lot of residual side effects, grogginess, trouble concentrating. It started to affect my job. And I find out later through studying sleep that about 80% of people do have next day side effects similar to what I had. And what's even more interesting about this, Elizabeth, is that in 2013, the makers of Ambien, which I was taking, they actually had to lower the dose for women. They had to essentially like cut it in half, I believe, because women were being overdosed on the medication. So it was just staying in women's bodies longer. So essentially what was going on with me was I was like getting inadvertently overdosed on Ambien. So it kind of makes sense now in retrospect why I was so incredibly groggy. Um, so I was on it for about 8 years. And then what got me off of it was I met a guy who is now my husband. And when we were in the very beginning stages of our relationship, he said to me, look, it kind of freaks me out when you take that Ambien, you kind of act like a zombie. And I was like, whoa, like in a very loving way. So that really gave me this sort of kick in the butt to start getting off the pills. So what I did is not what I recommend other people do if they're on a sleep medication. I ended up going off of it on my own. So for anyone who is out there who is on a sleeping medication and wants to stop, my advice would be to contact your prescribing provider, ask them for a taper schedule, and follow that. Ideally, you might want to contact someone like me, a sleep coach, who can kind of help give you that accountability and guidance and give you tools to give you better sleep confidence. But I was able to get off the pills, fortunately for me. And I slept pretty well for many years after that. And then the pandemic shook things up again. The pandemic, the early phases of the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, those first few months, I started getting a little shaky with sleep again. And I was like, I am not going down this road again with the sleep issues. So I started to Google and really kind of got myself out of that rut and started talking about my sleep and what I was doing to fix it on social media, completely organically, just like you would share like a great restaurant or a movie. And all these people were like, I'm having trouble sleeping too. This is really helpful. And that is really what kind of gave me the impetus to start this sleep coaching practice, is because I realized there was a huge gap um, in the health coaching world. Not many people were doing sleep specific only work. So that's kind of how the full circle thing happened. And now I'm really helping a lot of people who either are on sleeping pills and want to stop, or they're almost at the point where they want to take the pills and they're like, I've got to get an intervention that's holistic and not pharmacological.
That's amazing, because I do see so many people reaching for, including myself, as I mentioned, like when I'm going through times when I don't know, I'm also, as I mentioned, my age, I'm 55, like I'm like in that postmenopausal thing right now. Like I already went through that. I'm like, I guess I'm 5 years into it because it started when I was 50. And I remember when I was younger, I never had problems sleeping, right? Never. The only problem when I drank, I'd pass out. It was definitely not like I was going to sleep. I was passing out. It might as well have been taking a pill because it was the same sort of effects, right? Isn't it just it? Because
Yeah.
that's what they say,
Yeah. Basically, it's the same process. You're basically being sedated by the alcohol, and you're also sedated by the sleeping pills. So they're kind of fulfilling the same purpose. You're kind of knocked out,
right? You're knocked
basically.
out. So when you're
Yeah.
knocked out, are you getting, how is your sleep when you're knocked out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, for sleep meds, what I do know is that some of our sleep stages are not really being completed. So we're not really getting that full restorative sleep that we would get if we weren't taking a medication. So that's definitely an issue. And, not to like freak anyone out, but there is some research showing that, mortality rates are higher for people who are taking sleeping pills long term. We don't exactly know why that is, but they have kind of drilled it down into like, certain cancers. There's a higher percentage of people who get cancer because they're on sleeping pills. There's a higher infection rate for people on sleeping pills, and they do sort of assume that the higher infection rate could potentially be because the sleep that we're getting on sleeping pills is not fully restorative, right? So there are all sorts of kind of correlational issues that we see health-wise with people when they are taking sleeping pills long term, but we don't have enough evidence to say this causes this. It's more of a correlational relationship, if that makes sense.
But it does make sense because I've heard so many times, like I've heard Deepak Chopra and other people that, I mean, I went and he's got his MD. He's also, the guru for meditation. And I went and saw him recently. I've seen him a couple of times. And he said the number one thing for your health is sleeping 8 hours. And how many people are really sleeping 8 hours?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because there was a poll that was just released from like last month, and it was breaking down the percentage of like basically how long people were sleeping. And there were very few people, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like something like less than 10% of people that were getting 8 hours or more. Now, I want to kind of bust a myth here, if I could.
Please,
So,
please,
so
please.
let's bust it. So there is what I call the 8 hour sleep myth, and what I'm trying to say by this is that like not everyone needs 8 hours of sleep. So when you look at
Ah,
yeah, it's a thing. So I get a lot of content fed to me because I'm a sleep coach, and a lot of the verbiage is all about 8 hours, 8 hours. But the reality is that the National Sleep Foundation recommends between 7 and 9 hours for adults 18 to 64. And I think that we get 8 because 8 is between 7 and 9, right?
okay.
But when you look at the fine print of the National Sleep Foundation recommendations, it says between 6 and 10 hours may be appropriate for some people. So that's a lot of latitude, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what I would like to share with people is that, just because your partner or spouse sleeps 8 hours doesn't mean that's what you need. You may need 9, or you may need 7. Like, you kind of have to figure out your own sleep need. But what is actually more important than the quantity is the quality of the sleep. So one thing that we found recently is a study about consistency. So what they found with this was that mortality wise, over a long period of time, people who were sleeping 6 hours a night consistently had better mortality rates than people who were sleeping inconsistent, broken hours of sleep that totaled 8 hours. So we're kind of moving in this direction with sleep recommendations, I think, I hope, where we're really taking more account the quality and the consistency versus the hours. I think people are getting way too wrapped up in the hours, right? So it's not just about the hours. There are a few more other factors that we need to kind of delve into.
Which makes sense because we're not robots, right? I mean, we are
Right.
not all
Right.
like all of our DNA is not all the same. I mean, some people exercise, a lot of people, some people don't. I have a friend who she only gets like 5 hours and she swears that that is enough for her. But I know she probably naps throughout the day. Can you include that napping in the day as some of the hours, or does it have to, you're like, does it have to all be at the same time?
Well, technically, the recommendation is really to have the big chunk of sleep in one, chunk. However, napping is a really good practice for a lot of people who are not able to really consistently get the amount that they're wanting to get. So for her, I mean, it's an individual thing that may be working really well for her. So I wouldn't necessarily think that would be a problem. Now, if she were to like be getting 5 hours all the time with no nap, she may be suffering from maybe some issues. But if she's doing fine, then there's really no need to worry about it.
And, napping is something that I remember being, and I even have friends that have little kids. Like I remember when my kids, when my kids were little, and I have three of them, and they're in their 20s. And when they were babies, it was like, oh my gosh, if they have a good nap, I know they're gonna have I know they're gonna sleep well tonight, and going to bed early, and then getting up early. Like that was their total routine, and they always slept really well. And then as they get older, they're like, I don't need a nap anymore. I don't, my youngest naps anytime I get him in a car still to this day. If I'm driving him in the car, it just happened when I was just with him skiing. I turned behind me and there he was sleeping. I call him, he sleeps in the roly kibbies. That's what I used to call it. But that napping, so many people think that, oh, that makes me a wimp needing a nap. But I think it's really healthy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a really healthy practice for people to take maybe 20, 30 minutes. Technically, I think it should be before 3 o'clock if you're
Hmm.
looking to kind of um, make sure that you have enough sleep job built up for that night. So the issue with naps where people kind of go awry is they will sometimes nap like late in the afternoon, early in the evening, and then you can kind of look at naps as like snacking on sleep, like a pre-dinner
Mm.
snack. So if you're having dinner at 5, sorry, if you're having a snack at 5 and dinner at 7, you might not be as hungry for your dinner if you've had that nap snack, right?
Right.
So sort of the general principle is to nap on the earlier side of the day and kind of keep the nap to 20, 30 minutes for kind of just an extra energy boost. It can help like with your productivity during the day. If you need to take that break during the day, I say go for it. Now, if you absolutely can't make it through your day without a nap every single day, that's probably indicative of something that should be looked at. It could be, a sign of a possible sleep issue. If you're like really like completely wiped out every single day at a certain time and you can't function, you may not be getting enough sleep.
Which makes sense because as you mentioned, there's so many things that are out there that are causing us to stay awake, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we look at when everybody talks about anxiety. I mean, growing up again, I didn't know what the word anxiety meant. I mean, I remember hearing it in a book or something, but it wasn't like something you hear out of like everybody's mouth everywhere you go all day long, which is something I do. I'm like, you have anxiety. I have anxiety. I have anxiety. I'm like, oh my gosh, does everybody have anxiety today? But I get that we do. I want to know why you think there's so much anxiety today.
Oh, well, I think, for women in our age group, I will share that we are, I think, often called the sandwich generation. And, someone like you have children, you don't have children at home, but like there are
Mhm.
many women out there who in their mid 40s to mid 50s who still have children at home, right? And at the same time, they may have parents who are aging and need assistance. And so these women are sort of kind of caught, between a rock and a hard place a lot of times because they're dealing with two different generations that need their help. And then their own needs get, they fall by the wayside. They're not prioritizing often their self-care and things that they need to do to manage their own stress. So I think, from that perspective, that's driving a lot of the anxiety among our peers. It's hard to speak for, other people, but that's what I'm seeing a lot within my client population for sure.
And what do you think about the correlation between drinking alcohol and going to sleep? Because I see a lot of people and people that are also taking Ambien and still drinking. And,
Oh, yeah.
busy living sober is all about getting busy living sober. And that doesn't mean, going and picking up a glass of wine. You can't sleep. And how many people I know, there's a lot. I mean, I have a good friend who every night she has 1 or 2 glasses of wine before she goes to sleep because she says, and I'm doing air quotes if you're not watching this on YouTube, um, that, "Oh my gosh, I can't sleep unless I have those 2 glasses of wine."
Wow. Yeah. I've actually heard of a lot of people who are in the same situation. And so what alcohol is doing, it's sedating us. It's making it easier for us to get to sleep. But what it's doing over the course of the night, it's really cutting off a couple of our REM stages of sleep. And that's the stage that's important for memory consolidation and emotional regulation. So those stages get cut off in the early part of the night. And then there's something called REM rebound, which happens sort of early in the morning. And that's when you see a lot of the wake ups. So we also know that alcohol impairs our breathing to some extent. It can increase sleep apnea rates. It impacts our circadian rhythm because we have our own liver clocks that are like on their own circadian rhythm. Um, it's affecting so many things, the alcohol is, and also um, we find that just the wakefulness, it's like we are constantly getting disrupted, especially at the end of the night. And they did a study a few years ago showing that more than one alcoholic drink for a woman in a night could reduce her sleep quality by up to 38%. That's
Wow.
a lot of sleep quality to leave on the table.
For
So,
sure.
so
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
so it's, and what we also find is that, there are a lot of people who develop alcoholism because they're using alcohol as a sleep aid, and then they become more reliant on the alcohol. They increase their intake to such that they are really kind of dependent on alcohol. So it's a really slippery slope to get into, to rely on the alcohol to fall asleep.
It's really hard, but so many people use it as a legitimate excuse because, we need our sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it will help get you to sleep, but then the quality is what suffers. So it's sort of like you have to kind of pick one or the other. And I think unfortunately, a lot of people are so used to the way they are with alcohol and sleep, as they don't even kind of realize like how their quality is impacted because they don't know any differently, right? So it's just sort of like the same old, same old. They just keep up with that habit, unfortunately.
It's not, it's again, you said it's a slippery slope because you get into that and then you're relying on it for everything. And it's again an excuse and it's legal and you can buy it at anywhere you want to buy it in most states, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I have clients I work with, and fortunately, no one seems to be having an issue with alcohol. Um, but I have clients who do like partake on the weekend, and they will go out and have drinks and dinner with friends. And then I see in their sleep journal lots of disruptions. And so what we work on is like, okay, how can you kind of allow yourself to drink, but without it disrupting your sleep? So the key with that is having your drink earlier in the evening and reducing the amount you have, because you want at least 3 to 4 hours of time between a drink and bedtime. You want to be able to process that alcohol, to avoid those disruptions. So I mean, if people are adamant that they want to maintain alcohol, there are ways to do it, that are a little bit more sensible for your sleep.
Which makes total sense. So when you were talking about the stages of sleeping, for somebody like me who really doesn't know all the stages, what are the stages of sleep?
Yeah, so stage one is sort of like right when you fall asleep. It's that kind of transitional phase. Stage two happens after that. And that's really about 50% of your night is spent in stage two, which is called light sleep. And then we have the deep sleep phase, which is stage three. And that is about 20% of our night. That's really the stage where we see like the most physical repair to our body. During deep sleep, we have something where the lymphatic system is going on, is active. And so the lymphatic system is our lymphatic system for the brain. So essentially, the toxins are getting cleared from our brain during that deep phase of sleep. And then we have our REM phase, which stands for rapid eye movement. And that is the phase where we're doing mainly most of our emotional repair, memory consolidation. That's where dreaming happens, and we see our eyes kind of move a little bit. So we pretty much have like 4 to 5 of these stages every like phases of sleep every night. And they last between like 80 minutes and an hour usually. So healthy sleep is going through those stages, without like lots of interruptions.
So what time does the dream time happen? That's like early in the morning, right? Like say
Yeah,
like 5 or 6 a.m. Is that
yeah, you're right. So the deep sleep phase happens usually around like the first half of the night, and then the REM phase is usually more predominant in the second half. So it's very, very normal for us to like in the morning as we're waking up to be in that REM phase, and that's one of the reasons why we remember our dreams, right? Because we've been woken up and we're woken up out of a REM state where we're dreaming, and we can kind of recall what's going on in our dreams.
and what do you think about like I've heard people say like if you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you have liver problems. That's a total correlation between liver problems. Is that true?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, I think there are many, many reasons why people are getting up around 2 or 3 a.m. And I think there is some degree of, validity to that with our livers being active at that time. But that's not the only reason. I think that there's so many things that we need to consider. There's waking up because you're too hot, which happens a lot, waking up because you have sleep apnea, a lot of wake ups that happen. Sometimes we need to actually get people's breathing tested if there are multiple wake ups like that. Often 2 a.m. wake ups are because people's blood sugar has tanked and the cortisol and adrenaline wakes them up. So there's a lot of reasons for the wake ups. And another reason for wake ups is it's the natural end of our sleep cycle. We will naturally wake up after we've completed one of those sleep cycles very briefly. And then typically we'll just go right back to sleep.
Mhm.
But it's where it becomes a problem is when somebody wakes up from whatever they're waking up from and they start to worry and they start to, ruminate and get worried that they can't get back to sleep. And so that's a lot of the people that I see, because that's really kind of part and parcel to people who have insomnia, is they're often very stressed out about the wake ups, and we're working hard to kind of de-escalate that worry. And something that is really interesting to know is that when we wake up in the middle of the night, our brains are actually not really in a rational place. We're really operating out of our amygdala, which is our kind of irrational part of our brain. So I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but like if you've woken up at 2 a.m. and you can't get back to sleep, the thoughts that you have are quite disturbing sometimes. Like
Yeah.
I've noticed that with
Yeah.
myself. And I'll think to myself the next day, I was worrying about this happening and this happening. And that's kind of crazy talk. Like you just really kind of, so I think at night we have to kind of like remember, if we can, that the rational part of our brain isn't actually working properly. We have to remind ourselves that sometimes.
So we don't have to beat ourselves up for being crazy in the middle of the night.
No, if you're kind of wired that way, you're kind of wired that way.
And then when you wake up your spouse or your partner or whoever it is next to you, and you're like, wait, tell you this. My husband's always like, can you keep it to yourself, please? I don't want to wake up right now. But there was when you were also talking about the time in between. So you said if you had a glass of wine, let's say, which I haven't had in a very long time, but you would wait 3 to 4 hours. What are your thoughts about when you go out for dinner? So if you go out for dinner, what time, like if is what's the best time to eat? And how
Yeah.
many hours should you have between your last meal and going to sleep?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we want to try, if we can, to have dinner earlier than probably what we're used to. So you want to leave probably at least, 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed, like have that 3 to 4 hour window of having no food, because your body is actually going to prioritize the digestion process before it's prioritizing your sleep process. So,
Mm.
I've actually adapted the practice of going to dinner at like 5 o'clock. And it's helping me a lot. And sometimes, quite honestly, you can't control like when you're going to go to dinner because there are other people involved in making the decision. But I have noticed that on the nights when I'm kind of like forced to go to dinner later, my sleep just isn't as restorative. Like my sleep score on my Oura ring is not as good. My readiness is not as good. So I think it's going to do everyone justice to like maybe think about scaling the time that they eat dinner back just a little bit if they're like a little bit later eaters.
I love that because it was like back when we were little. I mean, I keep talking about when I was little. I mean, but when before, not people would be like, "Oh, I'm going to dinner. It's a blue light special, right? Where I'm going to go really early. I'm going to go I'm going to go at happy hour or something else." But there's something to be said for it because I think that when you do, like I know, especially when we have like a 7:30 dinner reservation. I mean, my husband and I both feel terrible before we go to bed, and then we wake up going, "Oh my gosh, I slept horribly," and it's because that food just feels like it sits there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like the tide is starting to turn a little bit. I think people are starting to kind of do things a little bit earlier. That I've noticed people, eating out earlier than they used to. I think it's just maybe trending that in that direction because people are starting to catch on. I think more people are wearing sleep trackers. They're able to see the data and they're like, oh, maybe it might work better for me if I go to dinner a little earlier tonight or whatever.
So tell me this with the suggestions, because you've named so many, but I want to get like put this all in a little package right now. So if you're out there and you're like, oh my gosh, for one, you would say probably don't drink I mean, drinking is not really going to help you if you're having sleep issues, right?
Not at all. I would not recommend that if you're trying to optimize your sleep, for
And
sure.
maybe don't even take all these sleep. So if you aren't going to go with, like I was the other night, like I'm going through this thing. I don't know. I'm going on a big trip next week. So I'm like, is that why I have all this anxiety? Like I just keep thinking about it. So I toss and I turn and I toss and I turn. And then I leave my bed. I go into another room because I don't want to wake up my husband with the lights and all that. And what are your recommendations when that's going on? Rather than going and picking up the Benadryl, what would you tell somebody to do?
Yeah, so I think what you're doing is probably a smart idea. It's called stimulus control and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's basically if you're tossing and turning for a certain period of time, you go outside of your bed and do something, relaxing in dim light, like read a book or whatever. I think that's a really good practice for people, especially if they are feeling a lot of anxiety about being awake. I think that that's probably a key is if you're feeling that anxiety, get out of bed because we don't want to pair bed with anxiety. But another thing that I would recommend for people to do if they're going through a phase like that, where there's like a kind of a palpable anxiety situation going on, like an upcoming trip or maybe an upcoming surgery or something that's stressing people out, it's called the constructive worry exercise.
Mm.
And this again comes from CBTI. What you do is you get a piece of paper and you divide it down the middle with, draw a line down the middle. And on the left-hand side of the paper, you write worries or concerns. And then on the right-hand side, you write solutions. So basically, you spend about 10 or 15 minutes doing a brain dump. So you're writing down a worry next to it. What's the next possible step in solving this worry or solving this problem or, getting resolution? So what the premise is that if you get all this stuff out on paper before bed, you're going to be less likely to be thinking about it if you wake up in the middle of the night. And I think it's a really effective tool for a lot of people who are having some sleep issues, insomnia, et cetera. It's been a helpful tool for a lot of my clients, for sure.
I love that. That's like journaling in the middle of the night, like journaling and getting that stuff out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the key is, you probably want to do it maybe around dinner time. I recommend that people not do it too close to bed because you don't want those things kind of fresh on your mind. But most people that I work with tend to find um, after dinner works or before dinner works, like some kind of anchor point time that like have with habit stacking, you after you finish one thing, you start another thing. So the after dinner works a lot for many of my clients.
And what do you think about reading on a Kindle or reading on your iPad?
So I think reading on a Kindle is fine. I have not read on a e-reader. Is that what you call it? E-readers
I know.
in a long, long time. But my recollection is that with the Kindle, you can figure it to be very, very dark. Like you can make the screen dark. And I don't think that those are actually that impactful in suppressing our melatonin. But we want to be a little bit more careful with like an iPad and the brightness of the iPad. So if you have an iPad, it's going to be better if you do one of two things or both of the things is dim the screen down to like its lowest brightness and set it to, I think it's called night mode or something like that, where the hues basically become less blue and they become more orange red. And then blue blocking glasses, I think is just a great, preventative measure to prevent your melatonin from being suppressed by the blue light. And those are just easy because you can just pop them on and pop them off. There's no like real, there's no like huge inconvenience for wearing a pair of glasses like that.
And you
So
can get fun ones, right?
yeah, I mean, there are so many these days. I think that the key is you want to make sure that the lenses are orange or red. And you
Okay.
want to make sure that you're buying from a reputable brand because quite often the cheaper brands, they actually are not blocking out the blue and green light as advertised. So there are a few companies that actually take the time to do the testing because you don't want to just wear a pair of crap glasses that are saying they're going to block out the blue and green and then they're not. I mean, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure there. So just be careful when you're shopping for the glasses.
What company would you recommend?
Well, I am actually affiliated with a company called Viva Rays, and I know them well as far as their scientific rigor, if you will, and just being good people overall and concerned for the environment, having sustainably sourced materials and really delving into the light science like they do. So I like them. A couple of other brands that I haven't tried, but I think are good. True Dark, I think is good. What else? Raw Optics. It's RA Optics. So there are a few that are good, but I'd probably avoid getting them on Amazon because there's just, I'm not sure of the quality there.
And then what about Caddis? You know, those Caddis ones, the Caddis?
Yeah, I've seen ads for those. Honestly, I haven't really investigated them. But with what I do know is that you to be true blue blockers, they can't really be clear. They can't,
Okay.
I don't know if they're advertising as blue blockers or not, but
I don't know. Yeah.
but I think they're cute glasses for reading from what I could see on the Instagram. Yeah, cute.
They do have cute designs. I just wanted to know if they were good or not. Well, I'm gonna have to go investigate a little more.
Yeah.
It has been it's been so great getting to know you, Morgan. Thank you so much for reaching out again and for coming on. And she's wearing Lily, you guys, for all the people out there that know that I love Lily Pulitzer, and it was her 65th anniversary this year. It's kind of fun. I love it. You look adorable. Thank you so much. And if you guys want to find out more about Morgan, you can find it in my description. I'm gonna have all the links how to reach her, and you can go directly from my description over to her website, and she can help you out if you're out there and you need some help getting off, especially those sleep aids, because you don't want to do it by yourself. And these are all our opinions on here on Busy Living Sober. It's nobody else's, it's our opinions. So thank you again for coming on. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So everybody out there, you know what I'm going to say? Keep getting busy, living sober. Bye, everybody. Take care. See you next week.